Excellent, excellent. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to this very unique and special gathering of the Central Ontario Branch of the Western Front Association. I know we all miss our personal gatherings, but good comes from everything. And we've been forced to develop this new format that will be with us long after this pandemic has faded into a distant memory. I'm thrilled that you're all with us today. It's a better way of us engaging with one another, and those that can't make it to the meetings, it's a great way for us to be together. So I thank you for joining us today for a very special day. Before I begin, I want to ask you to reflect on the soldiers of the Great War from all sides, from both sides. They were fighting for their cause. They gave up all that was dear to them. It is a chapter of history that engages us, that fascinates us, that has so many layers. We just continue to peel away the layers, and we never seem to reach an end to it. The stories are infinite, and that is the purpose of our gathering here today. I'll ask you to reflect upon those soldiers as I read the words of Lawrence Binion. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
We will remember them.
Again, welcome everyone. I want to thank our new members. I want to thank guests today. I happen to see Kim Wright has checked in from EAP. I'm very jealous. I know we're all at different places, the magic of technology. I thank David Fuller, the wizard David Fuller, and I thank Floyd Lowe, a couple of our technological geniuses who add to our audiovisual experiences. Without them, I don't know where we'd be. We want to begin as well by thanking our special guest we had on November 8th. The launch of our Zoom meetings was Dr. Tim Cook of the Canadian War Museum. Dr. Cook is a great friend to our association, and he gave a typically insightful lecture on his new book, The Fight for Canadian History. And through the magic of our technological wizards, the lecture was recorded. A link was sent to you. You can click on that link, or you can go to our COB WFA website, and it's also on the website. So feel free to, at your leisure, enjoy Dr. Cook's lecture. He's also made available to us the book through the publisher, Penguin Books. I know our guest today will find that funny. He has a affiliation with making fun of Canada and penguins. We'll get to that later. But Penguin Books is the publisher. And if you go to, let me find it here. If we go to Penguin Bookshop online and use the code COOK2020, you'll get a discount on the book as well as free shipping. And it's a wonderful Christmas gift. You can order from the comfort of your own home. It supports history. It supports our history. It supports people like Dr. Tim Cook, who work to keep these memories alive and deliver the messages of our history. And so again, Penguin Bookshop online, and the code is COOK2020. You will have received a link. If you've missed it or lost it, just send me a note. Send any of us a note. We'll see you get that. So it's a great gift, free shipping, discounted book, The Gift of History. Let's see. And while I have you right where I want you, membership in the Central Ontario Branch of the Western Front Association is $25. It is the best $25, I might be biased, that you'll ever spend. Subscription to the magazine, support for our cause of remembrance, the camaraderie, the socialization of our Great War family, as I like to call it, because we are a Great War family. We're a wonderful collection of history enthusiasts, and I don't know where, on a personal note, I don't know where my life would be without many of the friendships I've made through our association. So you're welcome to give the gift of membership. It's a very creative, it's a unique gift. We'll send a certificate to the person of your choice announcing that you have purchased them a membership for the year, which includes, of course, our Maple Leaf magazines, which we're very proud of, and we're all promoting it. It circulates throughout the world. It's written by our membership. It's a very high quality publication. Our next issue is, with a bit of luck, at the printer next week, and the feature article was written by Dr. Tim Cook. So I encourage you to keep an eye on your mailboxes before Christmas. But again, in conclusion, if you give the gift membership and a subscription to Maple Leaf Magazine, some of you have taken advantage of it. It's a great idea and a very creative, thoughtful gift. So keep that in mind. A little bit of news before we get to our main event. Some remarkable news came out in the previous week. A Newfoundland soldier was identified. He was found 4 years ago, and he was identified by a collection of individuals. It's not a one-person job, but it was a young 17-year-old boy, and his name was John Lambert from Newfoundland. Missing all these years, he was found with 3 other soldiers. Sarah Lockyer is the forensic anthropologist with the Canadian government who took over for our friend Laurel Clegg when she moved on. And with a bit of luck, we'll attract Sarah to come and give us a presentation in the new year. But part of the team identified this young boy 4 years after he was found. And when the dust settles and we return to some sense of normalcy, he's going to be buried at New Irish Farm, I believe, in the open cemetery in Ypres. Interesting enough, New Irish Farm, the cemetery, if you're, was originally a battlefield cemetery, or Irish Farm Cemetery was. It was lost after the war, right at ground zero in the center of the Ypres salient. And it wasn't until they went to build an office building that they found the cemetery. And a lot of the soldiers that had been lost, buried by their comrades, 1917, 1918, they basically moved them across the highway to New Irish Farm Cemetery. So there's a lot of unique aspects to that. And it's an open cemetery, and that's where Private John Lambert is going to be buried with his 3 comrades, and hopefully they'll be identified as well. Just, I mentioned we're going to try to attract Sarah Lockyer, the forensic anthropologist, in the coming year. We have a couple of these Zoom meetings set up pending for the new year. So until we can all gather again, this is how we'll be seeing each other. So anyway, we'll get better as we go. But it's good to see you all, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. For our little association, we seem to attract some and make friends with some wonderful people. I think that's a measure of our character as a collective. We've had, Ted Barris, Martin Middlebrook traveled from England to see us. He's almost 1 million books in print. Canadian historian Norm Christie, Dr. Tim Cook. We've had so many wonderful speakers come and join us. One of the most sought after premier lecturers in the world on the subject of the Great War. I don't know if I'm telling secrets out of school, but he is often said to me, it's killing me. I want to tell you things, but I can't tell you because you've been sworn to secrecy, which is a bit of a part of his presentation today. He signed confidentiality agreements on many of the projects he worked on. But Andy Robertshaw is, if you've had the pleasure to attend a meeting or had the chance to meet him over the years, he's a very fine gentleman. He never says no to anybody. He is a very genuine human being and a great ambassador of history, just a wonderful ambassador. I don't know where the Great War history would be without him. He's advanced research. He's done some remarkable things. It's no stranger that Steven Spielberg attracted him to work on Warhorse. Peter Jackson, They Shall Not Grow Old. Andy was a historical consultant on They Shall Not Grow Old, probably one of the more remarkable films of our time, the restoration process there. And of course, Sam Mendes with 1917. Imagine that, a Hollywood blockbuster mega project on the Great War. Who saw that coming? Much like Dr. Tim Cook's book being a bestseller. So Andy Robertshaw, he's a tour guide, he's a broadcaster. The first time he probably registered with me was I recognize the importance of him was a series called Finding the Fallen. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was done by Yap Films here in Toronto. It's a remarkable series, Finding the Fallen. Seek it out, find it wherever you can, and multiple episodes, just incredible historical television. And anyway, We're just thrilled that he's with us today through the magic of technology. He's a very fine gentleman. And without further ado, let me hand the microphone to our good friend, Andy Robertshaw.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Glenn and to David for allowing this to happen. And let me just try now sharing my screen and see what we get. And it should now appear as my presentation. Good. Okay. I think we can begin. It's interesting to talk to people in Canada where it's early morning. I know there are people in the UK and further east of me in Europe where it actually is now late afternoon, as it is here. And I suppose the key thing about history is it's all about perspective. And as somebody at the moment watching with fascination what's unveiling itself with Brexit, I need to remind people of a headline in the newspaper, The Times, from late Victorian period, which was "Fog in Channel, Continent Isolated." And I mention that purely as a way of saying you really have to have as much perspective as you can on a subject to try and understand it. And to my immense horror, if not joy in a strange way, I discovered about 2 days ago, courtesy of a colleague in the UK, that my grandfather was not in Belgium with his unit on the 11th of November 1918 when the war ended. He was actually in hospital close to Boulogne, having been gassed on the 28th of October. So, you know, we live and learn, and every day is a learning day. My presentation is clearly filming 1917, and I hope many people have seen it. I'm going to just say that my job on this one was the military consultants on the historical side. There was another chap, Paul Biddis, currently actually in Sicily working on a movie, who was in charge of the movement that you see. But my job began very, very early in the process. I was in fact recruited on the back, as you gathered from Glenn, of working for Peter Jackson on They Shall Not Grow Old, a fascinating project which set out to be a new way of looking at the Great War. And between you and I, as you will all know, this came out in 1918. I thought that would be the end of Great War movies for a while. I could not be more wrong. 1917 is already out. Coming out is The Kingsman, the prequel to the series that some people may have already seen. Guess what? Set in the Boer War and also in the First World War. And coming out when it can is a new version of Poirot, which begins in the Belgian trenches in 1918. So our fascination for the Great War is shared by others. And just to give you an idea about how people set about making this movie, I was firstly interviewed by the producer of the film, a 1 hour process that took place on the telephone. I was then called to the studio, which was actually a fascinating job in itself, where I met a variety of people involved in the production, culminating in meeting Sam Mendes. By the way, when he's in his office, he takes his shoes off. And one of the things you should never do when trying to get a job for a movie is stand on somebody's foot. I did. I still got the job. But I think what may have sealed it was that before I went to see him, I went away and looked up his grandfather's service record. They were relying at the time on the book that Alfred Mendes wrote in the 1970s, his memoirs. I realized that they were partial, and in fact there were some, I hate to say it, errors in it. He misremembered which ship he arrived from Trinidad in the UK on, but I was able to then produce about 14 pages for Sam, explaining exactly what his grandfather did. And curiously enough, his grandfather, like mine, was not with his unit at the end of the war. He was very, very sick. And the question I've been asked is, why not set the film which we know as 1917 at Passchendaele? The answer is very simple. Movie money. There's a film called Passchendaele. If they'd set the movie at Passchendaele, no one would have funded it. Hence, it was moved, and they moved it to the German withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line. Also, out of curiosity, Kirsty and Sam Mendes, Kirsty being the scriptwriter, based themselves at Arras during the time they were doing their research. So clearly it was going to be somewhere near Arras. And my job really kicked off very, very early on in putting together the nuts and bolts of this project. Which unit should we portray? And one of the things that we had to do was work out where men could have come from. They were very keen to use the 2nd Devons as their key unit that they were going to go to. And the question would be, where would they start? And the start line that they'd picked up with, near Arras, just to the southeast of Arras. Who was there at the time? Answer is the 18th Division. 18th Division had been commanded by Ivor Maxey. My favorite division captures Thiepval. That's mentioned obviously in the script. Therefore, what I was able to do was start to put nuts and bolts to give a level of historical realism to what is, after all, fiction. A number of people have said, well, why didn't they just fly across and drop a message to the forward unit saying, call off the attack, basically it's going to be a massacre? Well, the answer, I suppose, would be a little bit like starting off the film Saving Private Ryan by simply radioing any American units in Normandy with a Private Ryan and asking him to walk back to the beach. It would have been a boring movie. You've got the idea, haven't you? There has to be some action. And to provide the action, we came up with, effectively, already screenplayed, 2 Lance Corporals, Blake and Schofield, Blake played by Dean, and obviously Schofield by George Mackay. And this is an example of their uniforms, and it's a way of actually pointing out, one, the insignia is there actually to East Surreys. Why? Because they're London-based, they have a London accent. It would make sense because the East Surreys recruited from that area. Next thing, we've then got the battle flash of the 18th Division correct to their battalion within the division. And as you can see here, this is one of multiple uniforms that were used over the period of the filming. And the key thing for everybody to bear in mind here is that the way that you see the film is most certainly not the order in which it was filmed. I mean, you could almost have guessed that, couldn't you? We'll pick that up as we go along. But this gives you an idea of the level of distressing required to produce these uniforms. And of course, what we then get is this. Now, this is straight to location. This actually is hair and makeup. And I have to say, hair and makeup basically grilled me for about a day about haircuts, what was fashionable in 1917, what wasn't fashionable, should they wear moustaches, should they not wear moustaches? By the way, the rule indicating you had to have a moustache had already gone by 1917, so some people could be clean shaven. The question was then about teeth. That was then the very bad teeth that we see in They Shall Not Grow Old. In other words, the whole production was absolutely on side. And so were the supporting artists. They used to be called extras, and one of my jobs was providing an explanation to these groups of people, both north of London, then actually on Salisbury Plain, which ironically is where the British Army trained and where many Canadians trained between 1915 and 1918, exactly what these men thought that they were doing. They were not cattle fodder. They were doing a job they thought was actually going to be successful. And any minute now, you're going to hear dogs barking because I've got a delivery coming to the front door. But it'll press on anyway, despite 2 Cocker Spaniels. Because then we've got then the East Surreys, we then got the making of the trenches. And we had to work then with the prop departments and also then location managers, finding locations, and very, very importantly, also then actually with the people who were going to dig these trenches. And it may surprise you to learn that on actually about 5 different locations, a linear mile of trenches was dug, but there were problems. One problem was the nature of the soil. North of London, it's clay. That's what we see here. When we then go to Salisbury Plain, it's actually chalk. So there had to be some indication of why that would be. And the answer is quite simple. The nature of the soil changes on the Western Front depending upon where you are. And guess what? The Somme, north of the Somme, is largely chalk. And further north, where the actual story starts, is largely clay. It actually is more logical than it may appear. But this gives you an idea of just one of many of the large hangars, let's call them hangars, set up, where in this case, supporting artists could be equipped on a daily basis. And they were doing effectively a 12-hour day, arriving on location around 6, changing to uniform, hair and makeup, breakfast, then transported to location, very often taking a couple of hours, sometimes carried actually in cattle trucks to get them where they're required, film all day, then back here to take all this gear off before they went home. It was a feat of logistics, because on any one day there could be up to 300 crew, a few actors, and a great deal of supporting artists there. And I had the great good fortune to work with some wonderful people providing some of the detail. This is incoming mail. You'll notice it's franked for March 1917. The film is set in March 1917. Here we've got incoming parcels. All of this was prepared and the detail was staggering, and that was because it might appear on camera. At no point did it really appear. It wouldn't have mattered. But believe me, the people doing this movie had the money. They also had the inclination to get it right. And for some of you with a memory for old photographs, some of you might remember a quite famous photograph of a sap head in which there was a periscope, there was a grenade box, there's actually a watch, and there's a soldier watching through the periscope. Throughout this film, there are nods to individual photographs and, curiously, to other movies as well. We'll see about that in a few minutes. But if you look at it very carefully, you'll see there's a big historical problem. The floor is close boarded and covered in chicken wire. Chicken wire was used for two purposes. One, grip. That's why they did it in the movie, so the cameraman walking backwards didn't fall over. But actually, in the Great War, it was used to stop soldiers shipping off pieces of wood and burning them to keep warm or cook their breakfast. So we've got this slight compromise. And this, by the way, this sap head is gigantic compared to the original one. The problem would have been here, you would not have got the actors, supporting artists, and the camera in there had it not been made larger than it should be. By the way, of course, we all know that British trenches are relatively small compared to German ones. And I remember on one occasion being taken by task by somebody who told me that the trenches in the film Warhorse were far too wide and far too deep. I had to point out that I just worked at Serre on the Somme on a German trench system that was 3 meters deep and 3 meters wide at the top. And frankly, you could run a bus down it rather than a horse. But let's not let preconceptions get in the way of a bit of history, shall we? And this is the cut and cover dugout where our two corporals meet a very, very unhappy officer. And I have to say, all of this filming was done among the very first bit of filming. And this actually is at Bovingdon, an old airfield north of London, used for many, many movies. Runways are very useful because you can put lots and lots of vehicles on them and they don't get bogged down along with all the tents that you need. In the movie, this actually is when they get to the front line. So you've got to bear in mind, they filmed this chunk about a quarter of the way through before anything else was filmed. But the stove in this area actually worked. And what they then did is they then moved down our trench. And frankly, a very good effort. complete with appropriate signal cables. I was able to get the very last batch that I'm aware of Dixies. One of them is in front of you there, come from the Indian word degzai, or cooking pot. In the UK, I cleared out a depot in North Yorkshire just shortly before the film started. Sadly, many of these were destroyed when over-enthusiastic people dressing the set, as they called it, lit fires either inside them or underneath them, and then the food simply evaporated and then the bottom fell out of them. So I'm afraid to say some 1950s items were destroyed in the making of the movie. But you can see this trench, meant to be a second line trench, barbed wired in, mixture of wattle, wicker, as you might call it, chicken wire, combined then also with corrugated iron. This is a very good representation of what a trench might look like in that northern sector, where the men have actually been fighting for over a year. Now, one of the most controversial issues in the entire movie that I'm aware of, apart from people pointing out you could drop a message to them and there wouldn't be a story, is the fact that we included in it non-white soldiers. Why do we do that? Well, one, because they were there. Two, because Sam Mendes' grandfather, Alfred Mendes, was mixed race. Therefore, it was logical we would do that. And what we did is we made sure for each of our regiments, whether it was the Cheshires or the East Surreys, they represent the ethnic mix that was there in 1917. There's a black community in London from the early 16th century onwards. This guy, mixed race, and working in this case with a dog that was utterly brilliant. It sat there virtually all day and had been trained very carefully not to look at the camera, and it didn't. For those people with an interest in these things, the cows in the movie and the rats, I hate to tell you, everybody, they're not acting rats or acting cows, they're all CGI. The dogs are, however, real, apart from the dead one outside the farm. That definitely is I'm afraid to say, a prosthetic. And we had problems, and the problems really were terrible wet conditions early in the filming in 2019. You got some idea of the flooding here and how important it was. We had no one falling over. We didn't have any accidents, not that mattered. We did have some accidents that didn't matter. We'll discuss that at the end. But clearly we did early on lose a camera when the cameraman walking backwards down this trench before the chicken wire was on, fell over backwards, smashing the gimbal. It was only £250,000, so it wasn't really much of an issue. And then these guys, my supporting artists here, we've got the correct setup for a corporal, in this case with good conduct stripe, and in this case a wound stripe. So we've got a little bit of history to our soldiers. And all the webbing and equipment was actually imported from Poland from a company called Hero. And one of the things we had to do was ensure that nothing appeared in the movie still badged up for, wait for it, Warhorse, because some of the uniforms were worn in that movie. And as you can see, the weather here was dreadful early on. But the key problem here is, how is it that I'm able to stand in the trench and take a photograph? Is this before the day starts? No, we're well into a day of filming. The problem is that stuff above their heads. It's called cloud. Because the filming was meant to occur over a period of less than 24 hours, the feeling was that each day should have exactly the same weather. There should be the same level of cloud. Now, clearly, that does not happen even in Britain, not even in Victorian Britain does it foggy every day. And a lot of this movie was spent, wait for it, watching the sky, waiting for a patch of cloud to appear so we don't get the dreaded, and you can see it in this photograph, shadow. There was at least one scene where that went completely wrong. But having said that, I couldn't be actually within the trench when they were filming. Where was I when they were filming? The answer is, I'm in the checks tent. And this shows the two men about to go over the top, Blake and Schofield, and I'm watching the camera view. And my job there is to ensure everything makes sense. There was one sequence when I had to intervene, where in fact it was felt by somebody in the production that our hero should actually work the action of his rifle before shooting the German pilots. Problem with that is, early in the movie, we saw him load and cock the weapon and put the safety catch on. If he had moved the action, he would have ejected a live round, something that no trained soldier would ever have done. So how does all of this work? Well, it works, at least in theory, as one continual shot. Now, you will be aware that is not possible. And how was it done? It was done with a series of what were called wipes. In other words, there's a sequence when the two men come into the trench, they drop down, they eat a morsel of sandwich, then someone walks in front of them, actually carrying a crate over their shoulders. That's a wipe. That allows then the next sequence to follow. The next wipe is when they go into Aaron Moore's dugout. This is the entrance to Aaron Moore's dugout. That dugout was empty. There's nothing in there whatsoever. The actual dugout was, wait for it, around 90 miles away on Salisbury Plain, inside a barn. That's our next wipe. And that's how the movie was built up. But also, to build the movie up, they had to plan very carefully the dialogue. The dialogue here was designed to be of a certain length, but they had to complete the dialogue before they leave the end of the orchard. All of this, by the way, you'll be aware, is fake. And before anybody says it, in March 1917, there would be blossom on fruit trees, even though it had been cold. But we'll leave that alone. That was a complaint. The key thing is that the dialogue was intended to be long enough to take them through the orchard to the end before they then moved towards the farm. Therefore, when they built this, and they built it from scratch, they had to actually plan it with that in mind. And we're now looking towards the farm. And if you look at it very closely, you can see that from directly above the farm buildings, made entirely of timber and plaster, there is a track. That's the original tank training track. To the right is the new road they built for the movie. And by the way, all of this now gone. You cannot visit the location. It no longer exists. But the key thing about the farm is that here, the designer took me one morning into the farm and said, "Does this remind you of anything?" And I said, "A French farm." He went, "No, the farm in John Ford's The Searchers, in which the camera focuses on a mountain that will be important later in the movie. Here, the camera, as it comes through the corridor, focuses on the pump, which will be important later on in the movie." So we have a nod to another film. And this is how the film starts. In other words, what I've done to show you is actually the film is filmed in not chronological order. And very importantly, nobody will recognize that actor. That's neither Dean or George. Who is he? He's a stand-in, because clearly there was a lot of time spent setting this movie up. And one of the things is that the movie actually is circular. The tree, which in this case, my stand-in has got his shoulders against, is about 50 meters away from the tree where the movie actually ends. It's a circular story of 24 hours. And now looking at this, you'll recognize straight away that this is where the movie begins. By the way, it's also where it ends, because the setup here initially is kitchens, wash houses, and mail being sorted would eventually become our dressing station. And before anybody says anything, yes, I know a dressing station will be further behind the lines, but for the purpose of the narrative, they made it much closer than it really would. And one of the things you've got to remember, if you're a movie consultant, they will consult you if they want the answer. If they don't, they simply ignore you, and that's the way it is. And this then is the farm. The pond, by the way, is real. Everything else is an artifice built purely for the movie. And you can see on the right-hand side a combination of large containers of dye used to dye the ground down, including the soil, which is very chalky, but also gas cylinders used to produce the fire inside the barn and also inside the aircraft. Now, it was planned at one point that there would be firing. I was uncertain about this one because our soldiers going over the top in the final sequence were a long way from the enemy, but groups of men were taken and they were trained in firing the short magazine Lee Enfield. Anybody that was clumsy or cack-handed was simply given a dummy rifle. The good ones got actually to practice here. And of course, there was no need to tell anybody in the area what we were doing. There was no question of noise pollution because on one occasion, at least, while we were filming, they were actually firing 105 light howitzers at the hill opposite, which really was a little upsetting for production because they wondered who was spoiling their film by producing gunfire effects. The answer was it was the army, and they were real shells. And this then you'll perhaps recognize as being the interior of that dugout. And one of the jobs that I did was provide everything from the D3 telephone there through to fuller phones, card tables, the maps, everything that was produced for the movie. We even produced a composite aerial photograph of the Hindenburg Line based on the Hindenburg Line. And the really strange thing about that is that the person that produced all of this material was taught by a teacher towards the end of her school career called Alan Fibbins in London. Alan Fibbins was my first history teacher. It's the same history teacher and gave her passion for history. I don't know if he knows this, but clearly he had an effect in 1917 he could not have expected, bearing in mind that Alan Fibbins last taught me in 1970. You can do the maths on that. And this is then my aerial photograph, correct kind of lantern being used, furniture salvaged from buildings, once again, structures, all of this built inside a barn and used for a day's filming. In fact, when the weather was not appropriate, it wasn't raining, it wasn't snowing. We did get both of those. What it was a lovely bright spring morning. So we filmed inside because it didn't matter. And none of the supporting artists were used on that occasion. And that is our situation map for the 6th of April, 1917 in detail, showing the location in this case of British front line, individual units, the new German line, and there it says 2nd Division, the objective of the campaign. And yes, this is based on a real map, which I sold to production, and they very kindly gave me it back. No, you can't have it. The key thing is that actually what we've got here is our setup from the beginning of the movie. All of those soil stoves there made of plastic. On at least one run through they caught fire. And it's worth saying, by the way, that all of that turf that you can see there is different colors, largely because it was imported, bought in enormous numbers, mixed with fuller's earth, produced the right effect to hide the fact that here, just below that turf, there is bright white chalk. That was not required. And the tree that the film starts with is the one we can see in the background. They go into a trench system, actually trench system north of London, and then they move forward. Now, I've jumped here slightly because I want to show you this. How many people in the film, and I know that some of you might be tempted to put your hands up, don't, because I can't see you, remember seeing the convoy of lorries drive off from outside the farmhouse, having seen the death, in this case, of Blake. They didn't. Why not? They'd actually stripped the chalk off to such an extent that when it rained the night before, none of those vehicles could move. You think you saw the vehicles drive off because you hear them. Actually, they don't. And most of the filming on the back of the lorry was done inside a modern vehicle with a fake back on it, with a great big bustle on the side to take the camera so that the camera could be inside the truck with them. By the way, one of the other controversial things about this film was the inclusion of an Indian cavalryman. Why did I include an Indian cavalryman? Well, guess what? The Indian infantry go to the Middle East, they go off to Mesopotamia, they go off to Salonika. The Indian cavalry stay on the Western Front. So the inclusion of one Indian soldier, which produced such a furore, bizarre. Just people know their history. They really wouldn't actually have even questioned it, but people did. For those people with an interest in these things, here we've got some lovely health and safety. This is the lighting inside the tunnel down which the men flee as they make their way from the exploding dugout. Now, the exploding dugout was actually at the studio. This tunnel is, wait for it, actually in a barn on Salisbury Plain. And this then brings us to the end of the movie, because this is actually where the final scene is shot virtually, when the news is given that says actually to Colin Firth that the attack is to be called off. As soon as you look at that, you realize you've got problems. One, they were meant to have been there for a couple of days. Quite how they built something as elaborate as this in that time, I don't know. But clearly it was required. It had to be inside. And if you look on the floor, what you'll see there is some of the trickery that goes with the movie. They are the stop lines for each of the actors to ensure that they and the cameramen are always positioned in exactly the same place. And clearly, when this was filmed, I was watching through a Chex monitor. And this then might fascinate people to know just how some of this was done. This is the route actually through the quarry. And this quarry is in Oxfordshire. It's nowhere near the movie start. It's nowhere near where the movie continues. This actually is in Oxfordshire, and it began with a brilliant prospect, the possibility of having an overcast day that would make complete sense of the overcast they had before they went into the German tunnel system, through the German dugout, through the German tunnel system to appear in the quarry. That would have been great, except the cloud cleared and it was then bright all day. So if you watch this sequence, it's the one sequence in which that you will see there is quite sharp shadows. But in the background, there's a pile of empty shell cases. One of the problems I had with this scene is that actually it matches an almost identical scene in another movie, which I cannot name. Why? Because I've signed for both movies a non-disclosure agreement. For this film, it ended as soon as the film was broadcast. For the other movie, can't tell you what it is. I can only tell you what it is when the film comes out. What fun. And by the way, had I told either production about what the other film was doing, I broke my NDA, I get fired and I don't get paid. Apart from that, there's no penalties. Now, for some of you may be aware that this aircraft is crashed Albatross. The actual crash was filmed in the studio, well, on the back lot of the studio. This aircraft is a replica of the replica, but very importantly, when you watch it, you'll be aware something remarkable happens. And that is, although they rescue the pilot from the starboard right-hand side of the aircraft, when you watch the camera work, the camera appears to go straight through the fuselage behind the pilot. Why? Because there was a gap in the fuselage that you do not see in the movie, but the cameraman simply walks through that gap. It's amazing. You don't see it, but if you were on location, you'd be able to spot it. And by the way, the large beam that falls down, all of that was done in such a way that it was completely controllable, because this sequence was filmed time after time after time. And as we can see here, what you think is going on is not really what's happening. This is me in the Chex tent taking an illicit photograph. I was not meant to have a camera with me, by the way, into the Chex tent so I could then see what happens next. And what happens next is multiple deaths. This layout here was done by the prop departments. Sonny Carr organized this. Each of those sets is a combination of the tin, the letter, the ID tags, all so that time after time, that death sequence can be filmed till they come up with a perfect one. The result of that was there were multiples of everything. And I think in the end, it was shot around 24 times before it became perfect. And by the way, no, I still don't know how he manages to go so light colored, so pale as he bleeds to death. But the bleeding was done by means of a pack of blood electronically controlled in his respirator haversack on his back. That was then triggered to make him bleed to death. And here we see it in the checks tens. Oh, by the way, the red dot, by the way, is makes sure that everything each time is registered in exactly the same place. And this then is just some of the movie magic. This is a wet day or a sunny day, I don't know what it was. That actually is the setup in the studio for part of the tunnel, complete with everything else, including on top scaffolding, so that the guys with their buckets of fake rubble can drop rubble onto our fleeing guys as they jump and run through the system. And some examples of just how much hair and makeup took to get this right. I'd explained that the long on top, short at the sides was very fashionable, not least being your inspecting NCO couldn't see you had long hair. And this young man, along with others, actually volunteered to have it done. I asked him why he was so keen to have his hair cut in such a peculiar way for basically 2 weeks. He pointed out every time it was done, he got an extra 10 quid. And so far, he'd actually had 5 haircuts and was doing rather well out of it. But you can see the dumps of ammunition and everything else, which is on the edge of that woodland that was actually in Salisbury Plain, where they emerge, apparently. And these are the guys in that woodland. And you'll know immediately why no one's filming, why we're just hanging around. The answer is quite simply, it's too sunny. It's not possible to film. And this sequence here follows our actor apparently coming out of a river. Just so you know, the scene in the village was shot at the studios next to the River Thames. They then filmed the sequence then of jumping into the river, which actually is done initially, at least on location, is then filmed in the River Wear. Then he appears here, having climbed out the river. By the way, they're only about 300 miles apart. And the scene with the bridge and the lockhouse was filmed in Glasgow. There was a lot of traveling to make this movie work. And this then is the sequence that you all know. Going into the trench, how was this done? Effectively, what we have is a handheld shot with the camera, which is then passed up to the left onto a dolly. In other words, a rolling tracked camera, which runs to the end of that as they then film from above. It's then handed down. Then as our actor then moves down the trench, it stays handheld. It's then effectively passed up to a motor vehicle that then goes down so that our hero can run following the motor vehicle. And this sequence was rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. And they did one impromptu run through of the attack sequence, and it went catastrophically wrong. Why did it go wrong? Well, each of the big explosions was one of a group of 3, so that within every filming day, you could film it 3 times, but no more, because everything had to be reset. Here we have 300 supporting artists using sandbags as steps to get out, because until we did that, they kept falling over. When they initially did the run through, the props people very carefully ensured that the bayonets, plastic, the rifles were replicas because of the danger. The shovels and pickaxes were made of plastic because that way they weren't going to take someone's teeth out. Everybody signed basically a disclaimer one young man was very enthusiastic and hurt his leg, tried to make a claim against the company because of his leg injury. It turned out, having talked to his doctor, that he'd broken his leg skiing in the march, and then actually had the cast cut off so he could appear in the movie. Guess what? He broke his leg again. And this shows hanging around waiting. You know why we're hanging around waiting. And I would really like a hot meal for every hour we spent staring into the sky, waiting for the cloud to build up. And this is my somewhat distant view of a run through of that attack sequence. This was done over a period of days. But what might surprise you to know is in the initial run through, there were 2 accidents. 2 of the supporting artists ran straight into Dean, knocking him over. In one of the discussions afterwards, somebody said to his mate, "When you knocked Dean over, why did you go back and put your helmet up?" And he said, "I didn't want to get shot in the head," which is exactly what a soldier would have done, which made me very, very happy. There's a lot of worry about how much damage might have been done to our actor, so they filmed it again and again and again. Guess what? At the end of the movie, at the very end of the movie, the one that they went with was the first and apparently chaotically bad run through because it had so much more energy than the others. And bear in mind that both actors lost stone making this film because it was filmed again and again and again and again. And one of my jobs was making sure in the hospital sequence, my stretcher bearers knew how to recover the wounded correctly, that the wounded would require to have water, and in this case, marked up as second Evans carrying their stretcher bearer straps. And one of the things that was great was the level of camaraderie that formed. And at one point on a really wet day, I said, "Lads, why are you putting up with this when the conditions are awful? Lunch is great, breakfast is fantastic, but you're wet and you're cold and you're clearly a bit fed up." And they went, "Well, if my granddad, my great granddad could do this, I can do it because I know I'm going home tonight." And I thought that made a big difference to the way that our soldiers appear in the movie. And then we end up here. And this was particularly sad because a lot of the wounded actually had lost limbs, and they'd lost limbs in action in Afghanistan and Iraq, and were now being dressed with bandages on original wounds, having trained on Salisbury Plain on this very location. This is bizarre, and I must admit I found that sequence quite disturbing. And we had to be very, very careful to ensure that people were kept warm and dry as we went on. But we provided everything that would have been there in a larger dressing station, including the monkey box, the so-called medical companion and all its contents, the bandages, everything was done. And the makeup and costume people were very, very good. They learned how to bandage and how to put on slings so they looked correct. And they borrowed my original 1917 manual to make sure it looked absolutely correct. And this bloody pair are actually a pair of our doctors. And the ironic thing about the guy on the right is that is Richard Townsley. His father was a doctor in the Second World War. His grandfather was a doctor in the First World War, and he today is a surgeon. Actually, he's a tree surgeon, but I got him on the movie because I thought it was useful to have somebody with medical background, because he actually reenacts both Great War and Second World War surgeons, and you'll hear his voice in the film. That's where then my story ends. You're probably going to say, why aren't we got any photographs of Glasgow? Why there's no photographs of the River Wear? The answer is there was basically one or two actors at any one time. My job there was done. So my job ends about 2/3 of the way through the filming. I hope that you found that interesting. I hope it's given you some insights into that movie process. I'm sure I've missed anything, but what I will say now to Glenn is that, Glenn, if you'd like a copy of the research I did on Alfred Mendes for publication later on. I will send that to you when we finish today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you.
As I said, Andy never says no to anybody. He's always willing to share his wonderful knowledge, and we're very grateful to you for appearing with us today, Andy. I know some of our members will have some questions for you. Dan Murphy, interesting enough, you know Dan.
Yep.
Dan is actually a director on the film industry, and Dan has some technical questions for you. So we're going to open up Dan's microphone.
Okay.
Are you there, Dan?
I think I'm live. Yeah.
There we
You
go.
are.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Fantastic. Terrific talk as usual. Very cool. The fact that I work in the business too, and just hearing all the stories sounds so familiar in so many ways. I think one thing I wanted to just mention is that you mentioned the checks tent quite a bit. Now, just for the uninitiated, in Canada, that's where the hair, makeup, and wardrobe people sit to watch what's being shot, so they can see that they're not only if their work is done, but whether something happens that they need to go in and fix it. In North America, we call those final looks or whatever, and in Britain it's called checks, final checks. So the checks tent is where those people hang out, and you were lucky enough to be there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was mixed up with them, and also Continuity and all the others. On one occasion, we got rather overloaded, and the van we were inside of, or the trailer, tipped backwards, which was really quite exciting. That was our only accident.
And I think also that what really resonated with me is that the final scene where the battle sequence, where they basically printed the first take.
Yeah. But
they went on to do so many more. The adage in our business is like, yes, print take 1 and take 42.
Yeah.
You know, so, and also I thought it was really cool, given all the prep that was done, that when the shooting starts, the advisor's job is to keep quiet until asked. I know that in many ways must be so difficult, but that's what you're hired for, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is that Steven Spielberg's approach was to have me on hand at all times, which is why I end up in the movie, because I was in uniform. Sam Mendes probably asked me 2 questions a day, one at the morning, one at lunchtime, and that would be it. So he had a different way of dealing with it.
Sure, of course. And I just wanted to point out that I have an original Orlex, and it has the spare light bulb and a piece of newspaper from the day covering the light bulb. So, and I love the sequence inside with these as the only light source was brilliant.
Just to say, by the way, we tried 5 or 6 different types of period torches before they came up with the Orlex as being the ideal one. And the ones that they use in the movie most of the time are made of resin because they kept getting smashed.
Of course, of course. Anyway, I just want to say thanks so much. Amazing insights as always. Can't wait to see you in person. And I have to give a shout out to my friend, Evil Glenn Warner says hello.
Oh, okay. So, thank you.
I will open it up to anybody else, but thanks again, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan. Excellent. David, our next question is our next question from Richard.
Let me find Richard.
Thanks very much for the presentation.
Richard Pivus or Winnan?
First for
Richard.
replica uniforms for
Which Richard are we waiting to hear from?
Disappeared on me here.
Not from Richard Pivus.
Right. Okay. So
Richard
if you just
Staple?
unmute Richard.
Richard Staple?
Richard, if you just unmute your microphone. Oh.
You're trying to unmute the wrong person.
Yeah, that's the wrong. That's our good friend Richard Pivus there. We want Richard
Yes,
Staple.
I
I think
have.
it is.
Thank you very much for the presentation,
There he is.
Mr. Robertshaw. What's the best source for replica replica uniforms were when.
Sorry, Tim, I'm not getting that.
David, did you get that? It's coming through very like.
Yeah,
Yes,
no, I don't know what that is,
am
and
I
I'm trying to
unmuted
find
yet?
out.
Okay.
Oh, that's Richard Wellesley
Thanks
would like to.
again, Mr. Robertshaw, for your presentation. What's the best source of replica uniforms?
A source for uniforms, I think he's asking about.
Reenactments.
Okay, yeah, fine, okay. Okay. Got it. Okay. If
Oh, Andy, hold on. I muted you.
Okay, shall I go?
Yeah, you're okay now.
Okay, fine. Best source for uniforms. To be honest,
Okay, for the third time on the far line, what's the best source of World War One replica uniforms?
Okay.
Currently?
Okay. Well, the answer is twofold. In the UK, there's a shop called Soldier of Fortune. They sell pretty good stuff. The stuff made in Poland, they don't sell it off. It's purely for hire. I've got some of it. That was just good fortune. I would say that actually the best that I've seen is produced in America. It actually is What Price Glory, at least for British uniform. I would say, which, by the way, they also produce Canadian uniforms. So I would go always with What Price Glory. I have a few items from them. They're very high quality.
Andy, just while I think of it, did you mention did Sam Mendes not lose a family member in the Great War? I know there was some family participation you mentioned, but wasn't there not a grandfather along in there somewhere that was lost? Or
no, he wasn't killed. He was in the UK when the war started. He went back to Trinidad. His father told him he couldn't join up, so he came back to the UK and joined up anyway. And then he served from 1916 to 1918. Then he was taken sick. And funnily enough, he's one of 4 members of the armed forces in Trinidad that actually is on the 4 corners of the monument when it's unveiled in the 1920s. So he was quite significant to be chosen for that, because you remember he only was a corporal, you know, that he was not a significant person. But no, I don't believe that I'm aware of anybody dying that was close to the family. I could be wrong about that, but certainly Alfred Mendes makes it.
understand. David, do we have anybody raise hands on your end there? David is muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize I had muted myself. I was
Yes,
being
you
too
have.
polite.
There's a question from Warren Otto. Can we activate Warren? Has Warren got audio?
Yeah. Hold
Hello,
on.
Warren.
Hold on. Where? Here he is.
I believe you know Warren, Andy.
I do. Has anybody realized, by the way, that actually Zoom meetings are now the modern version of the seance? You know, is there anybody there? Tap once. Oh, yes. Tap twice for no. Yeah, go on. Anyway, go on.
Hi, Andy. Nice to see you again. Wonderful presentation. I didn't really have a question. At least I didn't think so. I put it in the chat, but yes, I picked up my replica Canadian Great War uniform from What Price Glory in the United States. And for anybody looking for something like that, it's very well put together.
It is.
I've picked up some stuff too from the UK, but most of the stuff has come from What Price Glory in the US.
Absolutely. I mean, the other person that makes some very good stuff is Richard Knight, but he's a one-man band, so you've got a bit of a long wait, but never say no to Richard Knight stuff if you see it.
Thank you.
And our new member, Barb Wells, has a question.
Okay.
Hi, Andy.
Hi.
I was wondering, is there a source in Canada where most of the maps are? I'm forgetting the name of it. It's at a university.
McMaster.
Yes,
Yeah,
McMaster's,
thank
it is. Yeah, and they've got a very good collection of them. Also, there's a good collection of them at a Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland as well.
Thank you.
Recommend them, both places. I think the ones at the Memorial University are available online. I'm not certain about McMaster's.
McMaster too. You can download very high
Brilliant.
resolution copies.
That's good.
Thank you so much.
Not at all.
Nice to see you, Barb.
Eric O'Brien would like to. Eric, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Andy. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
So I remember seeing it, and I've heard this among some of my other reenactment friends that noticed at near the end of the movie, during the approach to that final trench line, there's some gentlemen that have these metal hooks on the sides of their helmets.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've been able to find a solid answer on that. So we're hoping you would have one.
Okay, David Crossman, David Crossman, who was the costume advisor for the military side of it, was very keen to do a number of things with helmets. One is to ensure that the stretch marks show from the original shells. So they were actually cast. Most of them were plastic. Some of them look extreme. Somebody, Steve Douglas, I think, asked a question about whether the helmet was in fact Portuguese, which is fluted. No, it's those stretch marks. And when they colored them, they actually look a lot more pronounced than they are. They also produce those helmets, wait for them, in different sizes to suit people with bigger or smaller heads. They actually cheated on the size because they only came in one size shell. But some of them in 1917 experimented with a version of the mail that you see on the tank helmets. And it's a mail apron that would hang down at the front. They did try actually then having them turn around to go at the back when you weren't using them in action to stop splinters and that kind of thing. But actually what the manufacturers did is they put the horns on so you could hook back the mail over those horns and it would keep out of your face when you were eating your breakfast or whatever. But a lot of people then chucked the mail away because it got in the way, but the horns stayed. So it's an example of complete uber realism of actually showing something completely redundant, but that was there. And if you ever find one of those helmets, just let me know. They're not worth a penny. There's just let me know. Just mail it to me.
I'm sure I will once I keep one for myself.
Okay. Oh, okay. Found a pair then. Okay.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
Oh, someone's saying they seem to mention online that there is one out there. Okay, it's mine. It's mine. It's mine.
Oh, Andy, I just got a message by email from Reese, and he is asking what your favorite day on the shoot was.
Favorite day on the shoot. That's interesting. I think my favorite day on the shoot was that initial sequence of them going into the trench and going forward, because everybody was so enthusiastic. They wanted it to work. The weather was awful. Everybody was kind of geared up for the long haul. And this feeling of this was definitely going to happen, because until literally I was on location, I wasn't certain whether they could pull it off. As simple as that. My worst day was the cast and crew preview, because I knew that once the film was out, anything that was wrong, it was too late for me to do anything about. I hated that whole process till the actual film credits went up, because I had no idea what might have gone wrong. So best day early on, worst day cast and crew preview.
Mark Carmichael, have you unmuted? You've got a question?
Yes, thank you. A fantastic presentation, Andrew. I have a couple quick questions. One is regarding the map you showed. How far back did when the Germans set the new Hindenburg line? How far back would they have retreated to?
It was between about 15 and 25 miles, depending on where it was. Basically, it came from the base of Vimy Ridge, which was now in our hands, and it basically stepped back, which meant they abandoned the entire Somme battlefield, but they then were able to withdraw to a line of fortifications that they pre-planned. They literally looked at it from an Allied advance and went, okay, where do we put our trenches to the best effect? They then used forced labor to build it, and then they withdrew to it. And we missed it for quite a long time. The idea that it was a complete surprise, the movie, no, not true. We knew it was there, but we weren't certain what its function was. But what it does is it basically means that the Arras battle, much of it is launched into the air. Does that make sense? Because we're now going forward to defenses that we hadn't planned to attack. It also shortened their line by a great deal. And it's called the Siegfriedstellung. It's not called the Hindenburg line. We call it the Hindenburg line. The Germans don't.
But like, if it went back 15 miles, or say 10 to 15 miles, would they be because they started sprinting out of the trenches? That's a long sprint to try.
No, the trenches that you see in that sequence where the white chalk is, they are actually advancing from trenches dug in front of the new German defense line. It's why it's so white and so clean.
Yeah. That's what
laid out, to be perfectly honest. I mean, they were meant to have been there a couple of days. They're jumping off positions. That's all they are. They're not like the well-developed trenches you saw on the old battlefield. That didn't come across as well as it could have done, but that was the idea. That transition from a churned up battlefield with dead bodies and dead horses through then to the green fields. And the motto of the Tank Corps is, of course, through the mud and the blood to the green fields beyond. But the green fields come with a problem, and that is concrete and steel, which we never see in the movie.
Yeah, one quickly follow up, because I just watched it on Prime, Gallipoli, that series. I guess it was for about 4 or 5 years ago. What's your thoughts on the how close they were in replicating those battlefields in that program? It's kind of related, but it's
what was the movie?
Well, it's a Australian series on Gallipoli. It's fantastic on Amazon Prime. It's about
it's pretty good. If you've ever been there, you'll realize how good it is. What I would say is Peter Weir's film Gallipoli is a very good example of POM bashing. That entire operation, the 3 waves, the complete brigade sent over the top, it's an entirely Australian operation, ordered by Australians and run by Australians. No Brit was involved in that action, but it doesn't make it any fun for Australians unless you can blame the Brits. And when you go there, it's about as wide as a tennis court.
Yeah, I was there in 6 years ago.
Fine, okay.
Andy, just before we get to Robin May's question, I've got a note here from Eric O'Brien. He says he has one of those helmets with the horns in place, and he got it at a place called Mons Military Antiques, and he paid a bit more than a penny for it. It was £1,225.
That would make sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think he was ripped off, and better what he ought to do is you give it to me, and you'll feel it's in a better home. That's the
Robin May has a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for being here today. Really interesting presentation.
Good.
I'm just curious to know, how long did the principal filming take place, like when you're on location and moving from site to site?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. The filming began at the very end of March 2019, and then went through. We finished on Salisbury Plain in July, but they were editing as we went along. So they were already matching things up and building the film electronically day on day. So there wasn't a kind of film sequence and then a post-production. Post-production actually morphed into the filming. Does that make sense? And I think they finished the last bit of filming on location in the August. I wasn't there and I can't swear to it, but then the film came out, as you know, the same year. So it's a very much quicker process now than it used to be.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Okay.
Andy, Eric has just written back to us saying he didn't buy the helmet. He simply found it online. So it's still yours for the purchase.
Okay, fine. That's good. That's good. Well, he knows what it is and why it's so valuable. You know, they are rare.
Yeah. Kim has a question.
Oh, I have to say it out loud.
Yes.
Just
Hi, Kim.
saying, I'm not, hello, and thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. I was just wondering if the main actors, did they know much about the subject before? And if not, do you think you could see a real interest develop as they were filming?
Yes, I mean, they were very professional in what they did, but particularly I thought George was very keen on the period, not obsessively, but the two of them asked lots of questions and were interested enough to try and find out more about their relatives who'd served, so they could get some sense of their families linked to the war. And there were other members of the cast and crew who asked similar questions. So yes, it certainly raised lots of family questions, so they could make a connection with the period, which was very reassuring. And I did similar stuff for some of the supporting artists who, you know, got in touch with me, or they asked how could they research it, and that was very satisfying.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Could I just quickly ask one more? Do you think it was possible for the actors on the movie set to see if they actually had a real taste of what it might be like, or is there just too much cut action, cameras, modern equipment around?
No, I think that on the whole, it wasn't possible to do that. I did propose a boot camp in advance. They did do a sort of a boot camp. They would have gone to a replica trench system and spent 24 hours there, but the production weren't happy. Their big fear was accidents. You know, somebody walks into a steel upright in the night, we then end up with scar or whatever. So they weren't comfortable with that one, but they did learn how to fire weapons. They did learn how to crawl. They did learn how to look after themselves in the field. And we did similar things then for the sporting artists. Nothing quite as intensive as was done by Spielberg when he did Band of Brothers, but a similar scope, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Andy, I have a question, and I don't know how much you got to see this, but how did they paper over the scene changes? Because the film is supposed to be all one continuous take, which we know, of course, it isn't.
Yeah.
But how did they paper over the seams?
I think it was that combination of wipes. So when you go round, for example, an upright beam in a dugout, you're able to then reposition the camera. It comes back to exactly the same place, but that will have been filmed hours or days later. Does that make sense? So what appears to be one take isn't. And clearly, I mean, Roger Deakins is a genius with these things. And it was just making sure it all flowed. And it was combined with endless rehearsals. I mean, rehearse. So that you know, it was flawless when they started filming it. And they knew exactly where each wipe would be and where the register was, that little red dot in the middle of the monitor, that would be then registered onto a fixed object. So the camera lines up on exactly the same place every time. So when they do the pickup, it looks to be one shot.
Right. And I had one quick question more. The thing that you explained that the reason they went on foot to deliver the message was because they wanted to do a movie. But how was it that they were crossing over an abandoned no man's land? I guess that the Germans had retreated and they were moving up. But why were the units ahead? Why did they have to go ahead to get to the other units?
I think the feeling was that gave the imperative of taking a message, and it's worth saying that Alfred Mendes's military medal was for running messages. So it was more than a nod to Sam's granddad. Was this carrying the message thing? And if you think about it, they go ahead of everybody to try and link up with them on foot. I suspect the idea being that motor vehicles wouldn't keep up. And if you watch the movie, there are demolished trees, there are demolished buildings. That is Operation Albrecht. Albrecht is the malevolent dwarf in the ring cycle. And it's that destruction that was done. They killed animals, they spoiled wells, they left mines behind.
But why was the unit they were trying to get to prevent from attacking? Why were they so far forward?
I think that the feeling was that the guy in charge of that composite brigade, because it's 1,600, it's not a battalion, was a thruster, and he'd gone ahead because he thought he could see a way through. It's militarily dubious, put it that way.
Ah, okay. So my
But
instincts were right.
without that, there's no story.
Yeah. Richard, Richard has a question. I'll just unmute him here.
Yes, I have a small arms question. You mentioned that in one scene where you're having a rifleman practice, that you remove people who couldn't work their Lee Enfields fast enough to be authentic. Could you have kind of a comment overview of the assault rifle capabilities of the short model Lee Enfield? The fact that people could fire 10 aim shots in 30 seconds or less.
Okay. The question then is about the short magazine, the Enfield, in use in the British Army from 1907 to the 1960s. Last used, in fact, by the Canadian Army in Korea. Very robust weapon, initially provided with volley sights for long range, then simplified, then in the Second World War simplified again. Soldier proof, 10-round magazine, unlike the German Mauser with a 5-round magazine. And the best I'm aware of in a minute is 37 shots in 1 minute, with a special loading technique. It's a very good weapon. In soldiers' hands, they can't break them easily. And I would say a superior weapon to anything the Germans had, but clearly, by the Second World War, the American Garand is better than the SMLE.
Great. I muted Richard. His bandwidth was low. That's why he was having trouble.
And what I would also say, by the way, in the film, all the rifles that you see virtually are replicas. A few were real ones, and there were a few real bayonets. Most of those bayonets were plastic to avoid accidents, because the great danger in making this movie, particularly with those over-the-top sequences, was somebody falling on a bayonet or stabbing his mate in the back of the neck, you know?
I've got another one from Kim, but she prefers for me to read it. That's okay.
Okay.
What is your opinion on the way the Germans were portrayed in this film?
Slightly better than perhaps they were portrayed in Warhorse, where either they were nasty or overweight and sympathetic. I mean, the idea of the German pilot stabbing somebody, if you take a weapon in the air in an aircraft in the Great War, it's so that you can commit suicide if the aircraft catches fire. The idea of doing that with a knife takes a long time. A pistol would have made more sense, but for whatever reason, they wanted that personal contact of a stab rather than a shot. I don't know why. It was one of those points of disagreements, and quite why he would have done that, having been rescued. Again, it's a point of drama rather than anything else. I think it possibly could have been done better. I indicated that in my notes, but they went ahead. And, you know, the director's the director. They wanted to get an effect which perhaps historically was not as good as I would have liked. And elsewhere, I mean, the German that agrees not to shout and then shouts, he's doing his duty to warn his comrades. Otherwise, he's being complicit in an act which is militarily a crime. So, of course, he might well shout out and then would, I'm afraid, have to be killed. Quite why the Germans are such bad shots, I don't know. But there again, in Star Wars, all troopers are bad shots as well. You know, it's the way it is.
We'll do a couple more, and we're getting close to the end of our time. There's a question from Johnny about the female tank, Andy. Or do you want to unmute Johnny so we can ask the question, David?
John who, sorry?
Johnny Dingwall there.
Hi there.
Oh, he's unmuted. Yeah, I've switched on unmute yourself. Okay, go ahead.
Andy.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
I meant the female tank. I actually meant the male tank. It was
Yeah.
male, wasn't it? Was it built for the film, i.e. out of wood, or was it CGI?
It's all entirely CGI.
It was, yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, it was never built. I think the feeling was that the last one, it cost about $500,000. They weren't going to do it again. It was in so briefly, it didn't appear. And I didn't see that sequence when they respond to it, because actually I was working on Kingsman the same morning, but don't tell Sam this.
Yeah. Right, cool. Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
And I don't see anyone else with a hand raised. So you did such a great job explaining everything, Andy, that there are fewer questions than usual. Amazing. What I wanted to say just to everybody before Glenn signs off is at work, I do webinars all the time, and we count ourselves lucky if we get 50% participation. For today's session, we had 100% participation. Everybody who signed up was here for almost the whole thing, and that's amazing. Andy, you've done it again. You're a star.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I do hope that perhaps by October next year I can come back and do this in person. Let's see if I can. It would be much more satisfactory from my point of view to do that. It's good.
And the pints go down better when you can actually drink them too.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's worth saying, by the way, that if anybody wants to do this, I've got a coffee cup here. They work really well with white wine in, because no one knows it's wine. It's good.
I gave up hiding it. Andy, on behalf of the group, as always, a simple thank you doesn't seem enough. You're very generous with your knowledge and your time, and we're all the better for it. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody that listened. I hope you enjoyed it.
I'm just going to take a minute before I sign off on the meeting or during the meeting and just conclude a couple of things for us. 2020 has been a difficult year for everyone. We've many of us have struggled, and better days are ahead is what I'm going to say. There's always better days ahead. So we're excited about a 2021. We'll have virtual format meetings, as well as in a perfect world, we'll be gathering again with some special presentations that are at different venues across Southern Ontario. So that is the plan. We have a store in the works. We're cooking up some very unique items. We've experimented with it a little bit to raise a little extra money. A little extra money always goes into our publication for colleagues see the birth of our Western Front Association store with some very fine products that everyone will need and desire. Reminder about Tim Cook's book. It's a great opportunity from the publisher. We get a discount on the book, and it's free shipping. Okay. And I would be remiss. I mentioned some of Andy's activities. He's not only a broadcaster, tour guide, historical consultant, jack of all trades, but he has many fine pieces of work in print. So feel free to look for those. We have a good friend in Ypres at the Grenadier Bookstore, Steve Douglas. I saw Steve had signed in today. Everybody who frequents the Menin Gate at some point in time has made contact with this fine gentleman. One of the messages that has come out of our pandemic is we try to do things to help each other get through these things. Steve's got a great store, fantastic books, artifacts, whatnot. Go online, message them. You might find something for your den, for your home, for your collection, something to read. Steve Douglas at the Grenadier Bookstore in Ypres. If you have any questions on any of the things I'm telling you, just feel free to respond to the emails or send any of us a note. We're happy to help you with that. Hope you all had a good Remembrance Day. It was a different one this year.
Glenn, before you sign off completely, I just had one note I thought I should add. I did a presentation recently on researching your Imperial Forces relatives. And I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but the National Archives in the UK is allowing free downloads during the pandemic. So files that you would normally have to pay £3.50 to get, they are free. You just have to sign in for a free account on the archive site, and then you're free to download the files that are available on digital.
Just to say, by the way, that's 10 per day. Just so you know, you've got 10 documents, but some of them can be absolutely gigantic ones. So war diaries are available, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the final point from me, if anybody wants got a question for me, my email is andy@andyrobertshaw.com, or send it to David or Glenn. Okay. And I'll help you.
I want to remind you about the gift of membership. If you feel free, if you know someone who would like a gift for Western Front Association membership. The Maple Leaf goes all over the world. Here is our Maple Leaf magazine in Afghanistan, being read on the battlefield in Afghanistan, which had a better. It's a young Canadian soldier reading our Maple Leaf magazine while on active duty in Afghanistan. So, the gift of membership. Okay. On that note, great to see everyone. We're looking forward to a better 2021. Thank you to Andy. Looking forward to some fine speakers early in the new year. I want to wish you all the merriest of Christmases with your families. Please look after yourselves. Be safe. We'll get through this together, and better days are ahead. And on that note, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.